Thanks for everybody coming. Nice packed house again as always. Jane Herndon with Policy Analytics was kind enough. We partnered with Jane's group a few months ago, and one of the agreements for the partnership is the report that she's going to go over here in just a second. I've had the true pleasure of getting to work with Jane in my former stop and now currently here, and you'll quickly find out Jane's terrific, and we're very, very fortunate to be partnered with her. So, Board, you have a copy of the PowerPoint that you will be seeing here in a moment, as soon as my IT director gets it up and going. And I think I do speak for Jane truly. If there are questions as Jane goes along, she means it when she says she would much rather you stop her and ask the question than have to do 40,000 emails afterwards of clarification. So if there's nothing else from the board, Jane, it is all yours.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure getting to be back down here and visit with you about this topic, property taxes, everybody's favorite topic. I am with a company called Policy Analytics, and we do parcel level analysis. So all of the numbers I'm going to present are based on all of the parcels of property in your school corporation. We actually pull each one, look at the type of property. Is it ag? Is it a home? Is it a homestead, or is it a rental? We run the tax bill on it. And then we also project out 10 years of time, helping school corporations do more long-range planning with regard to property tax revenue. You're going to see tonight most of this information is about your operations and your debt fund, because those are the funds that are funded with property tax. We're not talking about money you're getting from the state for your education fund, although I will talk a little bit about income tax.
Jane, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Pause just a second. If anyone wants to move so they can see the screen, that I'm sure the board wouldn't care. And yes, feel free to.
Or if you want to push it.
Or yeah, Eric, if you want to kind of twist the screen just a little so folks out there can see it.
Is there a key to this one? While we're waiting here, I know that Dr. Comer and probably your underwriter, and you've probably even gone to conferences about Senate Bill 1. I just want to highlight a few reminders about it. What the effect of Senate Bill 1. So can I click you? No. Go back 2, I think.
Nothing's working.
One more. Perfect. So one of the effects of Senate Bill 1, there we go. Thank you. You're welcome. Is that over the next several years until 2031, Senate Bill 1 will increase deductions on homesteads until 2031, at which time 2/3 of the value of the home come off the property tax system. For the first time, ag and rentals, or 2% types of properties, have deductions. Those are going to increase over time till 2031. 1/3 of that value will come off the property tax system. We have a new homestead credit, which I'm sure you've talked about. That's $300 or 10% of the tax liability of a homestead. And that's a credit they receive, so that's dollars they don't have to pay to the school, to the county, to the town, etc. Business personal property, which is basically equipment. For farms, it would be something like a combine. For business, it could be shelving, it could be computer equipment. If the value or the cost of that property was $2 million or less, it comes off the system beginning in 2027. And then there are also some changes to the capitalization rate for farmland, which is having the effect of lowering and keeping down that base rate. I say and remind you of all these changes because the effect is going to be the shrinking of net assessed value. And as you know, for the last few years, many units of government have been in a place where we've had some growth in the net assessed value. That's either let you keep your rate the same and generate a little bit more money, or in some cases, it's actually letting the rate drop a little bit and keeping the same amount of money. It's been a good place to be with regard to local government. This is going to have that opposite effect. It's going to be shrinking or at least holding down net assessed value. So let's take a look a little bit at your school corporation. If you, like I said, as Dr. Comer said, if you have questions, please stop me. I'm going to try to avoid going too deep into the weeds, but absolutely, if you want to take a little side detour, I'm more than happy to. These are the 5 taxing districts within the Borden-Henryville School Corporation. Focusing there on the right-hand side, you see the town of Borden property tax or taxing district, and you can see it's really the only one with that orange municipal or town rate of 59 cents. Everybody else is not paying a municipal rate. They may be paying a township rate or a fire protection rate, but not a municipal rate. And that's one reason why the overall tax rate for people living in town is $1.91 compared to Wood Township at $1.37 or Monroe at $1.43. Overall, that is relatively low tax rates compared to taxing districts across the state.
Question on Carr Township, since the split, part of Carr Township goes to Silver Creek, part goes here. Is
Yes.
that only our part, or is that comprehensive?
That is
Carr
just your part. It does not include the tax rate that Silver Creek would add on to it. Great question. And in fact, you can see here in my little note, the 87 cents that we're showing across in that turquoise, that's related to the school rate. That's 87 cents. It's made up of Borden-Henryville's total tax rate of the 777 plus the legacy debt of 9 cents. So that's where we get to that 87 cents for the school rate. Okay. This is slicing that information a little historically. So let's just focus on the top left there, Monroe Township. That's about 35% of your tax base. And overall, the tax rate has decreased a little bit, since 2022 for those taxpayers. You can see your school corporation rate has moved around a little bit. I will point out in 2024 that 88 cents was a rounding. My guess is you were below the 88 and we just rounded it up to 88. But you can see you were pretty consistently been below that 87 cent promise that was made at the time of the division. One of the effects of that overall lower tax rate than many other taxing districts across the state is that you don't have any parcels in your school corporation at the tax cap. That is actually fairly rare now. There are some districts, but not a lot, that have low enough tax rates that homeowners, the 1%, are not hitting their tax cap. You can see here you have almost 11,000 total parcels of property in your school corporation. You can see at the top left here how they're broken out by taxing district. 35% is in Monroe Township, 29 Union, Carr 17, Wood 15, and the town of Borden's 30%. All of those, no parcels in those various districts are at the cap. You can see the median homestead in the school corporation as a whole is 270,000, almost 271,000. That varies though, depending on where people live. So if you look at that far left bar there, the Borden town average homestead is 178 compared to Carr at 292, for example. And the far bottom chart is again showing you have no properties at the cap. That means that you have not and are not experiencing circuit breaker loss. So a lot of other districts like New Albany, Floyd, or like Clarksville, or Greater Clark, all of them, because they have higher municipal rates, are experiencing some circuit breaker loss. In some places a lot, in some places a little. This is the makeup of your tax base. So the far left-hand pie chart is gross assessed value. And I think of that in homes as market value. That's before the deductions are applied. And you can see that you're 90% residential. That probably doesn't surprise you. You have some ag at 3%, a little bit of apartments, a little bit of commercial, and some business personal. That's that equipment. We move to the right, to the middle pie. That is the makeup once we apply the deductions. For the most part, residential are having that larger amount of deductions, and that's going to continue to grow until 2031. Ag has a little bit this year, as does something like apartments. And that, therefore, that's how you're going from 90% to 84% as compared to each other. You have no TIF, which again is a benefit. It does make you a little bit unique. There are a lot of school corporations that aren't able to tax their entire net assessed value because some of the properties in a TIF district. You don't have that. That's great news for you, at least with regard to tax rate. So now let's look a little bit at net assessed value, both historical and moving forward. So on this chart here, and I'm not going to touch it, the green line is your gross assessed value. Again, for today's purposes, let's think about it as market value. And we've all experienced this. This is the time period where people are getting multiple offers on their homes, values are going up. You can see for the most part, this blue line here is net assessed value, the dark blue. They were fairly parallel to each other until Senate Bill 1. Senate Bill 1 is having that effect because those deductions are increasing. You're able to tax less of the gross assessed value. And our projection is that that is going to decrease through 2031, at which time all the deductions are implemented, and then you're getting back to a place where you have some growth again. The dotted line is where we would have put you if Senate Bill 1 didn't happen.
That's what, thank you.
Yep.
That's what,
so this is where we would have thought your NAV would be. You can see continuing to be parallel with the gross if Senate Bill 1 didn't happen. And in fact, the last 21 to 26 overall growth, you had 11% growth in your net assessed value in the last 5 years. This year, it was about 8.7% in NAV growth from 25 to 26. And as a comparison, we're projecting negative 4.1.
And Jane, from your work with other districts, municipalities, is this chart similar? I know those two are alike, but is it?
Absolutely. Great question. I appreciate you saying that. This shape is similar to almost every school corporation. Even the Zionsvilles, the faster growing school corporations, the Clark Pleasants, it's very, very hard to have so much growth in your gross AV that you can offset this reduction. So and it's not just schools, it's every unit of government that uses property taxes. We do like to think that our report is conservative, but I would say it's realistic. You know, for a long time, conservative would assume meaning zero growth, right? That's what we did for a long time. We'd just assume no growth in RAV will be conservative. With Senate Bill 1, that's no longer the case.
Is there anywhere back here later that's going to consider growth to affect that 4.1%?
That's a good question.
Because there's a lot of housing.
Yes, and
Okay.
if you give me a second, if I don't
Okay.
talk about
I just wanna make
it,
sure
remind me,
I
I'm
didn't
gonna
forget.
talk about that on slide 14.
Okay.
So, that's a great question. This is those deductions increasing over time in dollars. So this is that increasing homestead deduction. So in 2026, the homeowners are getting deductions that equal 794 million of dollars that you're not able to tax. And then on the right-hand side, you can see ag rentals never had deductions in 2025 and before. Now they're starting to get deductions. So these are dollars that you're not able to tax because of these new deductions. This is the annual change in net assessed value. So this is where I was talking about we've had some nice years with some growth in them regarding your NAV. And then this is those next 5 years of what we're projecting. So a couple things about this. 2027 in virtually every school corporation looks like it will be a pretty negative year because of the business personal property exemption kicking in. That's what's causing that bigger step down. Now, to your point, Mr. Roper, we are assuming 3.8% growth in your gross assessed value. There's a couple things going on. We are starting to get data from the state that's coming from all the auditors that will be rolled into next year's assessed value. And it looks like gross AV again is up more than 3.8. In fact, it looks like your county as a whole, so I don't have it broken out from Borden-Henryville, is closer to 9%, 10%. So it is very plausible that what we're showing is definitely a worst case type of scenario. Also, if you have new housing being built that's above that 3.8%, that would affect this as well. So we can, if you know and have information about new neighborhoods coming on, if we have idea of number of houses and the value of the houses, we can do some additional projections to help you build in some growth if you know some of that. You can see after 2031, we get back to a place where we have some more normalized growth after
But
that.
you're projecting, we're nowhere close to what we've been accustomed to over the
Correct.
last few years.
Correct. Yep.
Unless there's in the future major adjustments to SB1.
And what we're suggesting for most people is that it's planning long term. It's better to plan using these types of numbers. And then if it turns out it's only -3 instead of -5, great. But the hope is that this is reasonably conservative. Then this is showing you some what we call peer data. We lined up all the school corporations in the state by ADM, by population, and we then took the 5 above you and the 5 below you, and we said, how much net assessed value does this school corporation have per pupil? And in a way, I think of it as purchasing power. The higher your NAV is per pupil, the lower your tax rate can be to generate the same amount of dollars. So you see the state average here is $524,000 per pupil. You're at that 700. That actually, if you look at the little box in the corner, puts you up above the 75th percentile with regard to dollar NAV per pupil. That's a good thing. And we also thought you might like to see it by school corporation of the county. Now this is a harder comparison because your smaller your school corporation, the bigger the number is going to be, but you can at least see where those other schools line up compared to you. So here's the flip side of that, and that's property tax. Again, you had a little bit more NAV per pupil, but that has resulted in then quite a bit lower overall tax rate compared to the state average here at the $1.02, almost $1.03, and that 77 cents puts you below the 25th percentile in the state of Indiana compared to other school corporations. Of this group, again, similarly sized districts, only River Forest has a referendum. Nobody else has a referendum. You know, obviously the state average does. And then here's how you compare to the other school corporations in your county. Now this one you probably already know, but just in case you can see it. The navy blue is your operations rate, and the turquoise is your debt rate for the overall, you know, little less than 78 cents. In order to understand what's happening to your operations fund and the effect on Senate Bill 1, we have to take a little detour and talk about local income tax. Because Senate Bill 1 did redo how income tax is used in the state. And it undid, it got rid of all the current agreements on how income tax is benefiting units like schools. So currently, you're benefiting in two ways. The first way is cash. So the county is providing approximately $196,000 in cash to you every year for your budget from income tax. The other way is the county is spending over $19 million each year to offset people's tax bill. And it's done in the form of what's called a property tax replacement credit. And you'll see that when we get into the tax bill. All of that is scheduled to go away beginning in 28 into 29. This is that $300 credit, or the 10% credit we talked about that homesteads are getting with Senate Bill 1. Because you haven't experienced circuit breaker loss, this might be a little bit of a unique concept for you. Because these are dollars that you put in your budget in the fall, saying you need this to operate your district, and these are dollars you are not collecting because of this credit, which is unfunded. It's the same thing with circuit breaker loss. That's a credit that the taxpayer gets that they don't have to pay the city, the school, the town. Same thing here. So let's look just at 2027. Due to this $300 10% credit that each homestead is getting, that means that you are not receiving $544,000 of property tax dollars that you said you needed to pay your debt and to operate your facility. The debt is protected beginning in 2027, so this loss has to come out of your operations fund. And so that's probably for you a little bit of a different concept. I will say right now, these numbers do not include the loss to the legacy debt. Right now, that is showing up on Silver Creek's budget order. We anticipate that the DLGF will allocate that between Borden-Henryville and Silver Creek. We're probably talking about total loss of maybe $60,000, something like that, beginning in 2027. And so your half of it would be something like $30,000 or $40,000. And remember that legacy debt's gone by 2032. So it's also just, here in the next 8 years. So in talking to your superintendent, we thought it might make sense to show you 3 different, what we call scenarios. They're really debt strategies. but 3 different ways to let's look at how it affects the taxpayer, how it affects our operations, and how it affects our tax rate. The first one was let's get from our underwriter the amount of debt levy we need every year to pay the debt you've currently issued. Assuming you don't issue anything else, what do we need at a minimum to pay? And that's what these numbers are here. We then worked through what does that do to your operations fund, what does that do to your tax rate? And we're going to graph all these, but I will point out to you, you can see the total tax rate goes from $86.95 up to 92 cents, up to 96 cents, up to $1.05. So that's even with asking for less money in your debt fund, because you can see it's going down here. The tax rate is still going up. Why is that happening? Because of the pie shrinking, because the Senate Bill 1 is forcing your net assessed value down. So even though you're asking for less money, no fault of yours, it's forcing that tax rate up. So this is one scenario you're going to see that we graphed. I do want to point out though, we did allow your operations fund to grow by the state allowed amount, the maximum levy growth portion each year. So another scenario we graphed for you and ran for you, and it's one that many, many school corporations are kind of changing their thought process and focusing on this, is saying, what would happen if we asked for the same amount of money in our debt fund that we asked for in 2026? And it's called the fixed debt levy. So many districts like you have managed to a tax rate, and that worked great when NAVs were pretty stable or if they were growing. It worked terrific. And now it's going to become much, much more difficult to do that. And so many districts are saying, let's just ask for the same amount of money each year. I'll tell you, I'm old enough that when I started practicing, in the 1990s, this is actually what we did all the time, because we said we can only control the principal and interest payments, kind of like your mortgage payment. Let's just make the same amount every year. The payment I know I can afford, I can't affect what happens to NAV. It's only been the last 10 or 15 years that we've gone to managing to a tax rate. So this is another scenario that we ran for you and graphed for you. One thing I wanted to comment about this option is all of these are higher dollar amount than what you need for your existing debt. So it would allow you to pay your existing debt, and it would give you some amount of room if you needed some more capital and you needed to issue some more debt. There would be a little room there for that. And then the last scenario was to say, what happens if we don't exceed 87 cents in total to our tax rate? And you can see down here, we made sure we stayed below the 87 cents, and the result was to lower the levy, basically, to get that tax rate down to the 87 cents. And so those are the 3 scenarios that we graphed for you. So this shows you the turquoise is your current debt levy, and this is how much you would receive in your operations fund if you just agreed to pay your current debt without issuing anything more. Now, a couple of things to notice. You're in 2026 at $3,416,000. Yes, it does increase, but it's increasing by about 3.5% over this time period between 26 to 2031. You do need to think a little bit about the expenses or the costs of what you're using that money for. Buses costs are going up a lot. Utility costs, as you know, are going up. Cost of property casualty insurance increasing. So the question becomes, do you get enough growth in each of these options to take care of what you're doing currently with your operating?
Jane, sorry for interrupting you.
Yep.
Are you, again, as you work with different groups, are you finding this is the real concern? It's the operations fund, and you gave some great examples. It's cost that we have no power over. The incredible increasing of bus costs, for example.
Yeah.
Energy costs. We could go on and on. Insurance costs, right? We can't influence that, but yet we have to have those things.
Correct.
And that affects operations.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we've done some studies and are in the middle of another one for the School Business Officials Association to that point. I mean, there's a pretty big percentage of what you use your operations fund currently for that are really non-negotiable. I mean, there are things you've got to provide buses, you have to have insurance, you have to pay utilities, and there's not a lot of ability to...
Yeah, to your point, I think we're like most districts. Mm-hmm. Our operations fund is, by and large, the huge chunk of that is cost, and we have to pay those costs.
Yes, absolutely. So you see fixed debt levy, this would be if you asked for that fixed amount in your debt fund, you get about 3.2% growth in your operations. And getting that rate down to the 87% would give you 4% growth in your debt. However, and this is a little confusing, is this scenario, this fixed debt levy, doesn't give you enough money in your debt fund to pay your current debt that's outstanding. And so we thought we better take a look at, if you had to pay the debt that's outstanding, what does that do to your operations fund? And so this is 87 cents. If you kept that as your total tax rate, you end up having to reduce your operations fund because you can't reduce your debt fund because of that outstanding debt. And that's where you're talking about this kind of result. And that's $1 million, that's 30% loss in your operations.
With all of that, we're currently taking a transfer from the education fund to the general fund. Is that figured into our projections here of where we're at?
That ignores that question. So what would happen is, you're absolutely right, you would have to transfer less or more actually into your ops because you don't have enough money otherwise. And so that's where it circles back around and affects your staff.
Yeah, and I hate to keep beating the same point here, but this one's really, really important for everybody in the room and watching it, the whole community, to understand. Terry made a great point. Right now, we're functioning over a percentage being transferred from education to operation. Under the current guidance of layout of Senate Bill 1, we can see how that affects operations. And again, I can't say it enough. That operations fund, there might be a little bit, but it wouldn't make a difference of things we could maybe skimp on or cut back. Mm-hmm. It's those fixed costs that continue to increase that we have no bearing over. And Jane, correct me again, based on groups you work with, by far the operations fund is much harder to put a projected budget together because of some costs that we can guesstimate. Energy costs, right? We can guesstimate fuel costs until they shut down the Strait of Hormuz that we didn't see coming. I mean, I'm using a crazy example, but it's accurate, right? That affected our operations fund greatly. So then, to Terry's great point, if that forces us then to have to look at transferring from education fund to operation, we know what the bulk of education, I'm looking at what BHTA rep here.
Yeah, it's people.
It's people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the struggle and when you look at the headlines, that's why you hear so many schools struggling with the effects of Senate Bill 1, because it's affecting virtually everybody's operations fund. Some of it is going down steeply.
And I've seen worse than ours.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Quite honestly, and I said this before, a lot of districts are going to this fixed debt levy. So they're saying, we've tried to control tax rate, Senate Bill 1 has done this to us with regard to the effect on assessed value. We can't control that. We can control how much money we ask for. And that's why a lot of districts are going to that concept instead of let's manage to a tax rate, at least for the next through 2031. After that point, they may go back to a tax rate type of model, but many districts are looking at that option. So let's keep going here. This is your debt service levy on these different scenarios. And the important thing to me is even with the fixed debt levy and the rate going up, again, because pie is shrinking, it's still below the 70 cents. And if you remember, that 70 cents bogey is the one in which every project has to be on a referendum ballot if you go above that. So they all are below that. I think that's the important thing on that slide. Overall school tax rate, you can see here, even if you only pay the debt you currently have outstanding, you're at a place that tax rate is going up through 23.
And again, to make sure everybody's on the same page, it is definitely, I feel, reflecting the consequence of Senate Bill 1.
Absolutely.
If a corporation moving forward wants to acquire new debt, it's almost forcing, it's a referendum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you see mid-45 districts are considering referendum in November of this year, statewide,
When was the last time you
because
saw
of this
that?
issue.
When was the last time you saw that?
Never. I mean, usually we have, I think a big year maybe was 7 or 8,
Yeah.
but mostly it's 3.
And that's just to keep the lights on. They're not talking about
Absolutely.
major projects necessarily.
And a lot of those districts already have referendum. It's that the AV is going down, so that same tax rate that they got the voters to approve 4 years ago doesn't generate the same amount of money in the next 5 years. That's why they're going back out now to just kind of true up what they've been asking for and what they've been using. All right.
So we're going to force the schools to go back and take the tax rate back that they gave away.
Mm-hmm. That's one way to look at it.
So with the blue line, when our tax rate goes up, in theory, we're not taking any more money from an individual other than we're getting a higher percentage of their assessed value. Or we're getting a lower percentage of their assessed value, but the same amount, correct?
Let's look at the tax impact on the taxpayer.
Perfect.
Is that right?
Yeah, great.
So, again, this navy blue is your 87-cent tax rate. So that's your promised rate.
Mhm.
And here's the impact of what this does to the taxpayer. Why is it increasing? Because their home value is increasing. Right? This here, this kind of big jump, $200 jump between 28 and 29 is due to the income tax going away. So let's walk through the bill here for a second. So you see in the right-hand side, this median homeowner's assessed value or market value in 25 was $250,000. It grew to 270 market value between 25 and 26. Their total liability went up a little bit, 1916, and then the county used income tax to lower their tax bill, and they gave them a property tax replacement credit equal to $216. That's what goes away in 2029, and that's what's causing that jump. You can see they have 0 circuit breaker. They're not at their 1% tax cap. Of that $300 homestead under post CB credit right here, they're getting $170. And so the overall bill went down by $56 between 25 and 26.
So does that
due to Senate
170
bill.
go away in 29 also?
Which one?
The 170, does it go away in
No.
29 also?
That $300, unless they change the law, that $300 or 10% credit is in Senate Bill 1. It doesn't have a sunset. There's some talk about them increasing it, quite frankly. I mentioned that we think gross assessed value is going to be more than what our report maybe is showing. I think you have to think about the political effect as well. So gross assessed value is going to be higher than what anybody thought. That's going to result in bigger tax bills, especially to homeowners and quite frankly to some businesses. Their percentage increases are really pretty high in assessed value.
Jane, is this the following scenario? Is it possible the tax savings the everyday taxpayer property owner is going to see in the short term with the way the current SB1 is written, if it forces organizations like schools, municipalities, whatever, forced to raise taxes, the increase in the tax is going to be greater than what they're getting back on this savings that you just described?
I think that depends on how much their gross AV goes up. But the reality is many people are not getting a reduction. They're just paying less than they otherwise would have paid. So if we showed you here, again, I wish I could get rid of the blue and the orange for a second, just looked at the navy. If we had put in here where this taxpayer's liability would have been if Senate Bill 1 didn't happen, it would have been up here. Mm-hmm. So their bill is down a little bit. In this case, a lot of this, taxpayers, that's not even the case. They look like the same or more, even with Senate Bill 1. It's less than it otherwise would have been. And that's the other reason we think that it's possible General Assembly could come back in and do some additional changes next year. We've been watching some of the press releases.
But that's also making a big assumption that gross AB is going to increase at a current pace.
Yeah, true. It's next year. Next year's session, usually the reaction is what is the hottest at the moment. But you're right. We have a downturn in the economy. All this is off. With regard to the growth in the gross assessed value, absolutely. So I guess my point is that even with the managing to the promised rate, this taxpayer is still going to get an increase in liability.
It happened this year.
No, they did not. This year they went down $56, correct.
But your AV went up, your assessed value went up, so you actually are paying more than, like you said, you pay more, even though you would have paid more if it wasn't there.
Than you otherwise would have. Something else I was going to mention about this. Well, and this is a taxpayer in Monroe Township. Let's look at one more. This is a taxpayer in the town of Borden. Now, their overall tax rate is a little bit higher at the $1.91. The median homestead, we use the median in the entire school corporation, so that's the same. You can see they get a little bit more of a lit credit or PTRC credit. They're $289 credit versus $216. That, again, is the amount that's going to go away in 2029. They still don't get any circuit breaker loss or credit. Their post CB credit is $227 instead of the $1.70. Why is it more? Because it's 10% of their liability. And the town of Borden has a little bit higher tax rate than the other taxing districts. So they went down by a little over $100, $122 down in 25 to 26. But again, even with your navy blue option, you're in a place where tax bills are going up. I did have a school board member a couple weeks ask me, where's the money? And I think the thing to remember is that this bill wasn't only about homesteads. Business personal property, $2 million or less, is exempt. Mm-hmm. So if you're a small business owner or other kind of business owner that has business personal property, that's coming off the tax roll. Ag, rentals, they got deductions for the first time. They've never had deductions before. Those are all dollars that are benefiting those types of taxpayers. It's not showing up on this. And then the other thing is, here's where they would have been, but for Central. This is, again, some peer analysis, and now we're looking at what we're calling net levy, meaning the amount of money you're actually collecting after circuit breaker loss, after that homestead credit loss. And for you and your operations fund, you're collecting a little over $2,000 per student. That is a little bit above the state average, not by much. State average is 1952, and you can see that 2039, puts you somewhere between the 25th and 50th percentile, and you can compare yourself to other similarly sized districts. And then we also compared you to other schools in the county. Again, remember, this is per pupil. So the smaller district is going to look a little bit bigger. So I guess a couple takeaways in my mind. I think as a district, you benefit from not having circuit breaker loss. You do have this new homestead credit loss where you're having to deal with, for the first time, putting money in a budget and not being able to collect it all. That will be slightly larger because of that legacy debt than what we're showing. The good news is the legacy debt's going away here in the next 5-6 years. I think for you, because the county has spent a lot of dollars in income tax to hold down tax bills, when that goes away, again, no fault of you. You don't collect income tax, you don't control the income tax, and you had nothing to do with this change, but the reality is taxpayers are going to have more liability in 2029. I think the other thing is almost all units of government are going to find it very difficult to manage to a tax rate for the next 5 years. And that says that being able to keep that rate at what you've been wanting to keep it at is going to be very painful. Is it doable? I mean, that's all for you guys to decide, but there's going to be a lot less dollars in your operations fund, and eventually that's going to affect people. And again, it's not what you did. It's because of the legislature and keeping down that net assessed value or having that shrink due to Senate Bill 1. And you're not alone. Every school corporation is dealing with this. I think it makes a little bit harder in that there was an expectation in your district with regard to that rate, and some other schools don't have that type of a complication, I would say. But they're dealing with tax rates going up the same way you are, even though they're asking for the same amount of money.
Would there be any advantage if it's still possible to take the debt and refinance it over a longer period of time to help in that time period of uncertainty or the great loss that we're going to be taking?
Look how smart you are. Generally speaking, you could have, but state law keeps you from doing that. It's called restructuring. And they only allowed school corporations to restructure if they had, I think it was more than 60 or 70% loss in their operations fund due to circuit breaker, historically. Then they took it away completely. Nobody could do that. Now they reopened it again, but again, you have to have quite a bit of circuit breaker loss. So the quick answer is you don't qualify for that. Not for extending the debt. You cannot take your new debt out and pull it out longer than the original debt. That's a great idea.
So you can't rebond a bond then?
You could refund an issue. Damien would have to tell you if you have any issues that are close to being legally allowed to. It has to do with when the call date is. You have to be within that. Now, I got my bond hat on, which I'm not supposed to have on, so you'll have to ask your bond counsel. But generally, there's a rule that you can't refinance bonds unless it's within 90 days of the call date. And my guess is he keeps you up to date. If something is refundable, he's probably been bringing that to you for a little while. You can't extend it out. You could take the savings and lower the payment, perhaps. Again, my guess is he would have already been talking to you about that. But it's a good question to ask him.
We're trying.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a really hard situation to be in, no doubt about it. Other questions? Your questions are fabulous. Thank you for asking them. Sometimes I don't get any and then I wonder, so I appreciate your questions. Other things?
If we have to go above the 87, will we just naturally let it raise up? Or do we have to do a referendum?
No, that was just a promise that we've made to our constituents.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying that to get to let's say if we have to go to $1.15, is that just gonna creep up there, or is it gonna have to be a referendum?
That's not a referendum.
No.
Unless somebody,
If we say we wanted to take a loan out, if you want to do a bond, do a project or pay bills or whatever, that's by and large moving forward is going to have to be a referendum under the current.
Not if you're not above 70 cents, it wouldn't be.
Right, but if you are, I mean, how
far away are we?
Well, your debt rate, where did that go? Here's your debt service rate. So let's just say you wanted to just pay the existing debt you have. That's that turquoise. So you wouldn't be issuing any new debt. So there'd be nothing to have a referendum on. It's debt you've already issued. So
We're
it's just
staying
when you
under the
did your
70.
budget.
Right.
And you could, and this is maybe more of a Damien question, you could issue new debt without a referendum, but you can't go above the.
Correct. So that's what this one is assuming. This difference is availability to issue some new debt if you had it. So if you decided, let's say, that you wanted to go for the fixed debt levy, ask for the same amount of money that you currently are asking for in your debt fund, you would do a hearing. You are below, let's say in 27, you are below 70 cents. So you'd have 2 public hearings. You'd open it up to a 30-day process. If everybody thought that it was a good project and you didn't get any kind of opposition, you could move forward with it without a referendum. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing either. I mean, it could be you start to, maybe for the first couple years here, you say, well, we're gonna just make sure we pay our current debt and take out the operating amount that the state allows, let our operations fund grow with what the state allows, and then maybe you come back in 29 once the lid is rolled off and all those kind of things, and at that point you decide you want to do a bond issue. So it's not all or nothing. It's each year as you do your budget, what do you need, and managing the overall levy that way. And start to think about managing levy instead of rate, quite honestly.
Yeah. I think that's going to be hard for a lot of schools to wrap their mind around, is the levy versus shifting to the levy focus instead of rate focus. I think we're going to have to do a really good job. It's even going to be more difficult for the general public to understand that too.
Yeah.
Because
Like
they've
I
been
said,
so accustomed
it's
to
a
rates.
return of thinking, because that's how we used to always do it, is you can only control we talked a lot like it was a mortgage. Here's the amount of money that we need annually in principal and interest to pay to do this improvement, and here's how much we need each year. We can't affect AB, so we're gonna let the rate do what the rate's gonna do. Great questions. Does that help answer that?
Yep.
Jane, I know you love going on your sunshine and rainbow tour. As you're getting these.
I will say that is one of the bad things about doing this job versus my old job. You kind of get done and you just feel all the air goes out of the room.
Really excellent job presenting that, though, Jane. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Anyone, while we've got Jane, anyone have any questions for Jane? If not, she's also really excellent. If there are questions later, funnel them through me, however, and we will definitely get you answers for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's a different scenario you'd like us to run, maybe it's something halfway between these two. Maybe it's you know that every third year you know you need X dollars in capital in a bond, and we could, you know, structure or do that way.
I would highly recommend in the future, if the board does want to go in that direction, we involve Jane's group, just so we can have a better idea of how that's actually going to affect our people.
And to be clear, we work hand in hand with your underwriter. We don't do what your underwriter does at all, but he oftentimes will use some of our numbers in making recommendations to you on what might make sense.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Are you okay if I slide out while you do your thing?
Yeah, you can take a break. Break.
Okay, we reconvene for our public meeting at 6:30. Thank you.